There we go. This session is being recorded now, so welcome again to the Tableau Prep user group for December 2023. So if you do need to drop off or catch up at another time, then you will be able to follow along with this at a later date. My name's Jack Parry. I'm one of the co-leads of the Tableau Prep user group. I'm also going to be presenting to you today. So for any of you that are new to the Tableau Prep user group, is this anyone's first Tableau Prep user group? If it is, you can put in the chat. Or are we all been to one of these before? Yes, first user group from Vanessa. Okay, and Joe. So quite a few, that's great. So we have three leaders of the Tableau Prep user group. Myself, Jenny Martin, who is a Tableau visionary, and also Jared Flores, who is another Tableau visionary. So we've got a nice leadership team. This user group was actually started back in 2020 now, so it's been running for a few years. I sort of started it because it felt Tableau Prep doesn't get much representation at a lot of the other user groups. I feel every user group I went along to was always people talking about Tableau Desktop, and Tableau Prep was growing as a product, and we felt like it needed its own space. So that's why we created the user group, and the idea is to give you lots of tips and tricks and feature releases from Tableau Prep, and also showcase some use cases from different people. So if you want to connect with any of us, then please feel free to do so. We also have a Tableau Prep Slack workspace. So we call this the Tableau Prep Playground. If you want to get involved, then please feel free to do so. We have channels for asking for prep support. There's a space where you can offer suggestions to the Tableau Prep product team. Quite a few of the developers are in there. If you want to connect with them, you can follow this URL. I will put that in the chat for you real quick, just so you have it. Let me just pull that. That should give you an invitation to join the Slack workspace. We're always welcome to new suggestions in there about the user group as well. So as we move into 2024, we're always looking for new speakers, so you can connect to the leaders in there. We are always open to suggestions. This is very much a virtual user group because we want to try and have a global reach. But if people are looking for local meetups, we can look at arranging those, or perhaps meetups around Tableau conference. We're always looking for new ideas, so please feel free to reach out. Before I dive into the presentation for this evening, we have some updates for 2024. So it's just one update actually, but we typically rotate this user group around different time zones. So if you are unfamiliar, Sharon, I don't know if there is with Bevy. You have a look. Is anyone else having sound issues? Or could you connect a headset, Sharon? Okay. I'm not sure if you can connect if there's a dial-in option with Bevy. I think it's just through the browser, but Sharon, perhaps you could restart the browser or something like that. It'll be a few minutes before we actually get into the proper content, so you shouldn't miss out on too much. Okay. So yeah, we usually rotate the user group around time zones. So every 2 months we will rotate. So we have America's focused and EMEA, and then we rotate through EMEA and APAC, and then we go back to the Americas and APAC. So that's what this session is. It's an afternoon session for Americas, and then for APAC, it's the morning the following day. We've decided from next year, from a perspective of attendance, but also for our own management across the leadership team, that we will keep the user groups focused always with the Americas time zone, and also then alternate overlapping with EMEA or APAC. That's just because there's more leaders in the US, so it's easier to manage that way, and also there are more users in the US, so we want to ensure we're encompassing that larger audience. So for those of you that miss out every now and again from the Americas to a live session, you'll be able to attend all of them from next year. So that's positive news there. Sorry, just Sharon in the chat. Okay, I can note all of these issues down. Tableau have migrated to this new Bevy platform. I can feed back to them. So if there's no sound for you, I try restarting the browser, but it sounds like some people are getting sound. So if you're really the problems, there we go. From Nathan, going back out and back in worked. Okay, we're gonna have to bear with this, but I can feed this back to Tableau. If you're interested in presenting, we do have a form where you can fill out where you can let us know your speaker session. We're always open to use cases that you might have from a personal project or your day-to-day work. We're open to more theoretical sessions as well. They don't have to be hands-on, just around data prep strategy and how you might be utilizing Tableau Prep, or even your Tableau Prep journey. Let's say you only started using the tool earlier this year and now you've come a long way with the product. We'd love to hear from you. But we're here to give you a sort of 2023 Tableau Prep wrapped today. So as I mentioned, we were meant to have Karen Hamilton deliver a session for us as well from the data school. Unfortunately, Karen is unwell, so we only have the one session today, which is from me, so leading and presenting today. And we're just going to recap the feature release of 2023 for Tableau Prep, because there's been some really great features that have come out in Tableau Prep this year. Hopefully, many of you might be Tableau Cloud customers and able to make use of these features today. If you're not and you're still operating on Tableau Server, then you'll have some of these features to come. But we want to make sure you're up to date on all the latest and greatest things Tableau Prep. As I mentioned, if you have any questions, I do have the chat open on another screen, so I'm keeping an eye on that. So just drop them in the chat as we move through. I'm also happy to have, given we have Karen unavailable tonight, dive into things a little deeper or answer any questions or even take some feedback for 2024 on what you'd like to see from the user group. So there are three sorts of focus areas, I would say, product releases this year. So we have the three releases. So we have 2023.1, 2, and 3. Tableau have changed their release cycle this year. So you may be used to previous years where we have 1, 2, 3, 4. Tableau have changed that, so we get 3 releases a year now. And instead of just going through 1, 2, 3, I think it was easier to group up these features into where they sort of sit in your flow. So we have our input improvements. So there is still in beta, which is interesting from Tableau, but we now have an Amazon S3 connector, which we're going to look at today. We also now have stratified sampling, which we will talk about if you are unfamiliar with what that is. And we have these improvements to the data input step when working with CSV or text files, where we can do a whole bunch of new features, and we're going to look at that. Ken, if there's still no sound, unfortunately, there is no phone number to dial in. I would play around with the sound settings on your computer, test the sound on Bevy, but we, as I mentioned, we'll take this back to Tableau. We can look at using Zoom in the future if there are issues with Bevy. I would recommend using Google Chrome probably as the browser that you're using if anyone's using Edge or something like that. But those are the recommendations I would have. So yeah, to recap, input steps, we've got S3 connector, we've got some stratified sampling, which came out in 2023.3, and we have these improvements to CSV and text files. Now we have the calculations, which this is the really exciting part, I think, of the 2023 releases in Tableau Prep, because a lot of these features here, the moving calculations, the running calculations, and the fill down, as something that I think Tableau Prep users have been clamoring after for honestly years since the product was released. I think for a long time, Tableau Prep has been able to tackle most data preparation tasks in line with some of the competitor products out there, especially when you're thinking about just cleaning a data set for Tableau. Some other types of analytics is still beyond the realms of prep, but that's not what it's designed for. But these here, the moving calculations and the fill down, enable you to really kind of tackle those slightly more complex data prep challenges, which you might have been able to solve to date with some interesting workarounds, but have made things really challenging. Whereas there's now some really nice functionality in the tool where you can make use of these. And then finally, we have some additional output. So you can now write to Data Cloud. If you're a big Data Cloud user, this is a great new addition to the tool. You can also input from Data Cloud. So you can now use Tableau Prep as your data preparation tool for inputs and outputs to Data Cloud. And we also have the ability to use what are called system parameters in Tableau Prep to timestamp the outputs of our files, which is something that has been requested for a long time now. But let's get into Tableau Prep now. So whenever I go through these feature releases, I prefer to demo this hands-on for everyone rather than just go through half an hour of a slide deck showing you screenshots of how these features work. We're actually going to get hands-on today. A lot of the demos I'm using are also using prepping data challenges. We'll talk a little bit about what prepping data is. So, if you do want to follow along with the recording at a certain point in time, then feel free to do that. But we're going to dive into Tableau Prep now. And here we are. So I'm sure you're all familiar with this. If you're not, and you're a brand new Tableau Prep user, this is the landing screen or the start page when you get into Tableau Prep. We have some recent flows open here. We have some sample flows. We can go ahead and connect to data. So I'm going to, first of all, go and connect to our trusty Superstore dataset. And this is just to showcase some new functionality in the input step. So first of all, some of the more general improvements is that a nice, simple sort of quality of life feature, let's say, that sort of snuck in there. You might not have noticed it came in earlier this year, is this ability to bulk remove columns of input. So prior to, I believe, 2023.1, you're reading in from a database table and there's lots of fields you don't actually need. You were having to go through, click each individual one of these, remove it, see Tableau Prep, get rid of it, go to the next one, and so on, which can be quite time consuming when you're connecting to, say, a table in your data warehouse that has 50 columns, But we can also go through now and hold shift, select columns, bulk remove. Nothing crazy, but some new functionality in there, which is really nice. Just to see that in action, I can hit the X. It will go through, get rid of all of those, and you'll see that appear in my Changes tab. Something else that you'll notice, if I want to just remove that, I can. We have this field here called source row number. This is a new feature where we can actually have a record ID be read in, so we can maintain the source input in terms of order of records, which was, again, a long-awaited feature of Tableau Prep. I'm going to show you later on how we can make use of this in one of our challenges for the fill down. But just to call it out, you'll see it's there. It gets turned off by default. So whenever you read in a new file, you'll see this source row number appear. But there's an automatic change to remove it from the data set. If I want to undo that, I can just right click and use include field there in the menu, and it will bring it back in to my data set. I'm going to undo that because we don't need that right now. So if we now go to tables or our data sample here, we have this ability to change the sampling of Tableau Prep. So some of you may know this, some of you may not. If you're working with Tableau Prep in more of a production environment, I would say you're probably aware that this happens. But if you've just been working with small data sets, flat files, you might not be aware that Tableau Prep does apply a sample to your data set when you're working with large files or large data sources. That could be from a database, it could be from a file. And to date, you haven't had the ability to execute what gets referred to as stratified sampling. So the way you would use this is if you have lower values of a population across a dimension, let's say, and we'll look at an example in a moment, to ensure that you have a more representative group in your sample. So let's say you have a Boolean field and you have 100 records, and for one value that makes up 90% of the values, and for the other value it only makes up 10%. And then let's say Tableau Prep puts a 10% sample on that data set at random. Realistically, then you're going to end up with one row of that other value, which really doesn't give you much to work across all of the other rows or all of the other columns of your data set to get that sort of equal representation when you're working with a sample, to make sure that you're testing for lots of different use cases you might have across, different values in other dimensions. And so let me show you what I mean by that with an example in one of these fields. So let's say, looking across here, this is a good example, right? So our order priority. The moment we've got 58% of our rows in the medium order priority, 29 in high, and then only 8% and 5% in low. So if I put a random sample on this, I'm going to get a small number of rows for low. It only represents 5% of the total data, but when I sample this, I'm going to have even less rows. And so then when we're looking at, say, across different countries, different cities, we're going to have a very small representation here. And that could lead to then, when we take off the sampling, potentially some elements we've missed in our data preparation. Whereas with the stratified sampling, we choose a column or to apply the to use as the base of the stratified sampling. So then we get an equal distribution across these values. So let's just have a look at the difference between turning on a random data sample of, say, 1,000 rows. We see here immediately this is sampled. So we get that orange indicator. As I mentioned, some of you might have seen that, some of you might not have seen that. If we go to our order priority, you see there, we're now at only 27 rows for low. So we could be really, this is naturally going to be underrepresented. So we want to bring in more values for low to make sure we're dealing with enough variety across some of the other dimensions in our data set. So this is if I have a random sample, but let's see how that differs when I then turn on a stratified sample. So when I turn that on, it says select n rows distributed across each unique value in a selected field. And the field I would like to use here is my order priority field. So I'm going to go down to order priority. You'll see a quick change there. Nothing changes here. But now when I go to the data set, in my clean step, we'll see something has changed. So nothing appears to be all that different here. And now when we go to order priority, okay, maybe that hasn't run through. Let's change that there. Just see if this makes a difference. Let's just flip that back. It's always good with live demos. Well, this was working earlier, which is always fun. Let's try with a different number of rows. Nope. We can come back to this one because I'm not sure why this is not working right now. But it was working earlier, so we'll dive into another one of the features. Anyway, that stratified sampling does work. I've seen it in action. I'd encourage you as well to check out Tableau Tim's video on stratified sampling because he has a really great explanation for it. So I'm going to try and play around with this a little bit later on, but that's in the tool. It's a really nice feature and adds something that's been asked for a while into Tableau Prep. So now let's have a look at some new functionality that's in there with a CSV connection or a text file. So I'm going to read in this EU Superstore orders.csv. And this is exactly the same. But I've played around with the file a little bit. So we actually have a couple of blank rows, and then we have the headers, and then we have the data. And you can see that's coming through here. So where I've got my field name and I've got my preview, you can see I'm getting F1, F2, F3, and I'm getting some nulls as well in there. So if I go to preview this data with my view and clean, we have this slightly messed up file. So this could come through just the way the sheet has been structured. Someone might have gone in and played around with things, or you might have some headers there that you've tried to clear out, but the data doesn't look right. And so to date, prior to these new features being in there, you would have to go through and play around with the data structure and just try to, filter rows where there's values that are null, but then you might have some values in the actual data where a particular row is null and get rid of nulls that you don't want. And it can be a real pain. Whereas Tableau have added some really nice functionality to the text input, where instead of you asking Tableau to generate the header, you can actually set this header. So you can say the header row. So in my case, the header row is actually row 3. So if I change that, you'll see now that my field names are read in correctly, which is really nice. I'm still getting that null value because my data at the moment is starting on row 4. So as I go to preview, I still have that row of null records. Whereas I can also specify where the data starts. So I'm going to add in that starts on row 5. And now, really easy. I haven't had to do any cleanup. I can do that all in the input step. I've now got my CSV exactly how it should be read into Tableau Prep. Let's see if this makes any difference to the data sample. I wonder. probably not, but I'm gonna have to dig into that one further. So those are the improvements we have to our standard inputs. There are also two new inputs that I called out earlier on in the session. So we can now connect to Data Cloud. So if you go down here, you'll see that we have Salesforce Data Cloud as an input, which is great to see. I personally don't have access to Data Cloud. I don't use it day to day, so I've not played around with this much. But for any of you that are using it, it's good to know that you can connect to it, and you can also now output to Data Cloud. But one that I can show you is this Amazon S3 connector. So this is something that is still in beta. This has been quite an interesting release from Tableau. So Tableau have traditionally released beta features to a subset of users who sign up to the beta, and they have to download a whole different software package and play around with it there. Whereas this is something that's been released into the tool. But if you haven't installed the connector, if you click this, it will ask you to, go and connect and install it. But this is something that does work. It's something they're still developing on. So the reason it's still beta is because they're figuring out some bits and pieces. But you can connect to S3. I'm going to show you an example, and you can publish this flow. It will continue to run on Tableau Cloud or Tableau Server. So the connector works kind of as you would expect. You don't get quite the same richness of configuration with the input step, but let's see what this looks like. So I'm going to click Amazon S3 beta, and it will bring up a pop-up in my browser. So you'll see in a minute, Chrome will appear down here. So this is what I mean. It's not quite as built into the regular UI as you might hope. But what we're going to be looking at here is, whilst that's loading, I have a S3 bucket here called Tableau Prep user group. And in there, I have an Excel file, which is that EU Superstore orders. Now, you can read in Excel files, you can read in Parquet files, you can read in CSV files. There's a couple of others as well. But there we go. We see this pop up appear. And I have to specify my bucket region, which is going to be EU West 2. The bucket's actually located in London. My bucket name is going to be my Tableau Prep user group. And then I'm just going to go and grab the access key and the access key ID from another screen that you can't see. So you have to set this up with IAM permissions for anyone that's familiar with AWS. So I'll go and sign in. And then you'll see that I can, it scans the bucket and it tells me it's found one file. So then I can go through and connect to my S3 EU Superstore orders. I'm going to hit connect. And if we go back to Tableau Prep, it's connected to S3, it's read in my tables. If I had more files in the bucket, it would read them in here as the tables, and I can go and connect to that data and go and play around with it as I would with any other input. So those are the improvements to our input steps. Some of you might be big S3 users. Some businesses might use Athena quite a lot, and the Athena connector in Tableau Desktop and Tableau Prep is quite slow. For anyone that's used it, you might be familiar with that. But this S3 connector is it's pretty good. It's pretty quick as well from what I've played around with. It works in Tableau Desktop as well. So if you want to go and connect to files in S3 and Tableau Desktop, you can use it just the same. But where there's some really great functionality is really in the calculations here. And that's, I think, the main thing to showcase today. So I'm going to just clear this sheet and we're going to work through a couple of challenges to showcase these. So some of you may be familiar with prepping data. Is anyone unfamiliar with prepping data? Can you just drop in the chat if you've never heard of prepping data? Everyone's heard of prepping data? Well, that's good. For anyone that hasn't and might be quiet in the chat, prepping data is just a weekly data prep challenge where the team that runs it, so Carl Olchin, Jenny Martin, both Tableau visionaries. Jenny, as I mentioned earlier, is one of the co-hosts of this user group. They release a data preparation challenge, which gives you an input file, a set of loose instructions to follow, and then an output to try and achieve. And the whole focus here is building out your data prep skills. So it was started to focus on Tableau Prep, but it's grown really over the years, and people are using it to learn Python, to learn SQL. It's a great learning resource for you if you want to go and practice your skills across any languages or Tableau Prep itself. And to show off these moving calculations and also the fill down, we're going to look at trying to solve two challenges here. So I'm going to build them out as if I was solving the challenge. So hopefully you'll pick up. I'm going to show that in just a moment. Hopefully you'll pick up a few tips and tricks along the way as well, because this will be a sort of broader Tableau Prep demo, let's say. So let me dive back in here, and we're going to head to prepping data. So if you just Google prepping data like this, it will come up straight away. It's great. They release challenges every week. This has been going since 2019. So if we go to the challenge index, you can see here there's years and years and years of worth of challenges. So you will not be short of data prep challenges. And what you'll see with some of these is that you'll see how Tableau Prep's developed over the years. There'll be some challenges back from, say, 2021 or 2020, where they'd be more advanced challenges because you didn't have some of the functionality you have in Tableau Prep today. Whereas some of those challenges are now really straightforward with these new features that we're going to, some of them, showcase today. So first of all, we're going to look at this moving average. So this is going to also showcase how you can use the new rows functionality in Tableau Prep. But we're looking at the moving average and creating some running sums here. So we have this data set, which is from a fictional bike store. We've got the date any bike was sold, the sales, and the profit related to that transaction. And we have these requirements that we're going to follow along with. So we need to input this data. We want to consider complete months. So filter up to June 2023, but we're later in the year now, so we're going to go up to November. That's a complete month. We're going to make that dynamic. So as we move through, we're pulling in new months. We need to aggregate data to a monthly level. And then we have this situation to deal with. So not every bike type has a sale in every store each month. And we need to scaffold the data. So we're going to make use of the lookup function, which is also a new calculation that you can now do in Tableau Prep. We're going to generate some rows based on that lookup, and then we're going to calculate a moving average for profit. So there's a lot there. I'm going to be talking you through it as we go through. If you want the link to prepping data, I will put it in the chat. And we will dive into this now. So I'm going to connect to data. I think it's a text file. All chains data, there we go. And that's all set up. Okay, let's view and clean that data. So the first thing I need to do is create that dynamic date filter. So I've got some forecast values in here that go up to 2024. And I want to just include complete months in my data set. So this is a common challenge you come across in data preparation and also potentially in filtering your dashboards. And I can do that with a very simple filter. So I'm going to do filter values, and I'm going to say, does my date column, is that less than date trunk? So date trunk is going to pull all of the dates to the first of the month. I'm going to truncate the date column, the month, and then I'm going to use today. So by using the today function, oh, I didn't close today. I'm saying take today's date and truncate that to the first of the month. So we'll get the 1st of December, 2023. and I'm asking, are the dates less than that? So hopefully anything in November 2023 and prior, we should keep. So you'll see a small change there. If I just show all of the values here and we scroll to the bottom down here, we'll see that we have that. So we don't have any dates after the 30th of November 2023. So that's good. That was our first step. So I could rename this step filter dates. It's always good to document your prep flows as you go through. Now let's take a look at my next step. So I need to aggregate the data to the monthly level for each store and bike type. So to do that, I'm going to use what we call an aggregate step. So I'm going to add in my aggregate. I'm going to group by my date. And you might be thinking I need to actually group my dates at a monthly level first. There's actually some nice functionality in the aggregate step where I can just go through group by level and say my month start. So that's going to do the truncation of the dates in the aggregate step. It does make it a date time. So I'm just going to change that to a date because I don't have any time values. It doesn't like me doing it there. We'll do it later on. And then we are going to group by my bike type and my store. And then I want to sum up my profit and my sales. So I've got a slightly aggregated data set. I'm going to add another clean step. But now we have this challenge where for any given store and bike, we might not have a sale in a particular month. And that can cause a problem with my moving average because if a bike in one type and store is sold every month, say the moving average for the first few months of the year would include January, February, March. But if there wasn't a sale in February, then for another bike, it would be January, March, April, because there's no value for February. So we need to deal with that. And we can see an example of that with our Brixton store and our road bikes. So if I just have a look at these date values, you can see here that I actually don't have a value in February 2020. You see how there's this blue highlighting on all of the other values? I'm actually missing a date there. And that happens with a couple of other instances in my data set. Okay, I just saw your comment, Nathan. Yeah, prepping data is a community challenge. I wasn't talking about just data prep more broadly. But yeah, so we need to find a way of pulling in a row or generating a row where one doesn't exist. And we can do that. Yeah, prep will do that. It might be actually because mine is set to British. But we can do that with this lookup function. So what we're going to do is essentially group by our store and our bike type, and then we're going to order by our dates. And we're going to use this lookup function to look up when the next bike sale was. So on my row for the 1st of January 2020, the next sale would have been the 1st of March, and we'll get a value for the 1st of March. And I'll show you how you set up that calculation now. It can look a bit intimidating. Some of the moving calcs aren't quite as intimidating, but I'll talk you through it. So we're going to create a calculated field. I'm going to call this next month sale. And if I go to my functions down the right-hand side, you can always look up how these are structured. So it's structured in the same way some of our analytical calcs are in Tableau Prep, where we can choose to partition by something. So that's our group by. But then typically we need to order by a field and then do a lookup. So that works in the same way as table calculations in Tableau Prep, in Tableau Desktop. So the first thing I'm going to do is going to do my partition. I always like to break these out into new lines. So I'm going to partition or group by both my store and then comma my bike type, and then close that off with a colon. Then I need to choose what to order by, which is going to be my date. And by default, Tableau Prep will do that in descending order. So I need to specify that I want this to be ascending with an ASC. And then I do another colon. And then I specify my lookup. So I'm going to look up my date. I'm going to do comma 1. So it's going to order the table for every store and bike type in order of months, in ascending order. So with that Brixton road bike example, we will have 1st of January 2020, then we will have 1st of March 2020. And so for the 1st of January, it will look up the next row down, which will be the 1st of March. And what we're doing here will come clear. So we'll do save. That lookup function is a new function of Tableau Prep. So it's a really nice new feature that we can make use of. And so if we now go to that Brixton road example, we look here. If you look at that row here, we can see that for Brixton Road, the sale date, first of all, there was the 1st of January 2020. And now our next month sale, because then was no February, was the 1st of March 2020. Whereas for gravel and mountain, because there was a sale in February, we see the next month sale being February. So we can now use this in part to scaffold our data. If I go to, let's call this full next sale. If I go to my generate rows step, which is this new rows tool, there's a couple of things we need to add in here. So first of all, we're going to value ranges from 2 fields. And I don't see any fields that I can pull in here. And that's because they need to be date fields and not date time. So let's go through and change that. So we'll just change this to a date, change this to a date. And now I can go through and say when my date is less than my next month's sale, generate me a row. And I want that to be in increments of 1 month. The problem is here is that because of this being when it's less than or equal to my next month's sale, for anything that is just 1 month ahead, we're going to get a row generated. So you see here, we have the 1st of September. I appreciate those dates are backwards for lots of folks on the call. We have the next month's sale being the 1st of October, but we're going to get a new row when we don't want one. So we're going to actually just tweak the next month's sale to minus a month from it. So in the case where we have January, skip February, March, we'll make the March date actually February. So we'll then generate a date for February. So let's just go back. And this is what I love about Tableau Prep. You can go back between the steps. And we're going to do this as a calculation here on our next month's sale. So I'm going to do create a calculated field. I'm going to do a date add here on next month's sale. And we can do date add month -1 to our next month sale. Great. We'll save that. We'll wrap that actually in a date function. Save. And now we have some functions flowing through. The only thing we're missing here is that we have some null values, and that's where there wasn't a next month. So in there, we want to just pull in the maximum month from a data set, which is going to be November. So I'm going to do that with a fixed level of detail calculation. So last month, we can do fixed in the same way we do Tableau Desktop, fixed on the max date. So we'll pull in that last month to any null values. And then finally, just tweak that next month's sale again and say if is null next month's sale, then last month, else next month's sale. So if it's not null, we want it to remain the same. If it is, we want to get that last month. So now we have no null values. So now we can go and generate those rows. So we'll see there that we're pulling in our next month's sale. We can leave that as new rows. But we see these null values coming through. So we actually would like our store and our bike type to pull through from the previous row. So what value should your new rows have? That's going to be copied from previous rows. And we're now going to call this field name our new date. So we have a new date column. So if we now go and add a clean step and we look at our classic example again, we go to Brixton and we go to road, and we should have in our original date no value, but in our new date that wants to change, we will have a value for February. We want to just sort A to C. There you go. So you see now we have a value for the 1st of February 2020 because we've used that scaffold. But if we look at that, what's going to have happened is we're going to get the value from the row above, which is problematic. So if I just keep only Brixton, I keep only road, and we look at that, if we look at that new date where there was actually no sales, we're going to get the values from the row above. So we actually want to make these values 0 because otherwise our rolling average is going to be distorted, right? So what we can do is we can just check whether our new date is equal to our original date. And if it's not, we want those values to be in as 0 because that's where we've added a new row. So I'm going to create that calculation. So we're going to call this step create zeros. I'm going to say for sales, if my new date does not equal my date, then 0 else sales end. So that will overwrite my sales column. I'm just going to copy that so I've got the same for profit. Save. And then I'm going to create a calculated field for profit. Let's say if my new date does not equal my date, then profit. Now we should see for that example, we get 0. So my rolling average is now not going to be distorted. So I've gone through where I didn't have a sale for a bike. I've generated a row. So I've used that lookup function. I've used the new rows features. These are all quite advanced features of Tableau Prep. So if you're a newer user, don't worry. This might feel a little bit advanced, but hopefully you're following along. And if not, you can watch the recording so you can go through this again. But we've created that dummy row, so we're not distorting our moving average. We've then created the zeros in there. So now we're in a place to create the moving average for a given store and bike type and see how our profit looks. So let's go ahead and do that. And what's really nice, and this is really what we're getting to, is how easy it is to go and create those moving averages. So I'm just going to get rid of some columns we don't need. So I don't need that next month sales. I don't need my original sales date. And I don't need my last month. And before this new functionality, you would have to go through, you'd have to do sort of like a reverse lookup and a self join to do the moving average. Whereas what we can do now is I'm going to go to profit. I'm going to go to create calculated field. We have this moving calculation now. And this UI in Tableau Prep is really, really nice. It makes things so straightforward. So we could group by my store and my bike type. Oops, let's just. This is something that I would love to see improved about the UI. If you add something to order by, you can't then remove it. So we've got to start the calculation again. This is a new feature, so there's always a bit of teething problems. But let's go back to profit, create calculated field, moving calculation. I'm going to group by my bike type. I'm also going to group by my store. I'm going to order by my new date. And then I want to create a rolling average of my profit. And this UI here, I think, is really nice in explaining what's going on. So we can see I'm using the previous one and the current to calculate this value. So I get this really nice box that appears around the previous values. And then I get the total here. So I can go through and tweak this. So I'm going to say use the previous two and the current. So then I get null values for the first two, which is expected because there's no previous two to use. And then I get the average there, and then that goes down the table. So if I click this value, I can see which three values are going into that. So it makes it really clear how this is being calculated. I think this is a really nice feature. So I can say 3-month average profit. And there we have our moving calculations. So you can also go ahead and add running sums. Another really nice feature there in Tableau Prep. But those are the moving calculations. We had to do a bit of work to get there, but hopefully you learn a thing or two along the way with some scaffolding and some lookups and the new rows functionality, all of things that have come into Prep in the last 18 months, I would say. But now we just have the one last thing to cover, which is the fill down. But before I move on to that, are there any questions from what I just covered off there? Okay, we're going to move on to the fill down example now, which is again going to make use of a prepping data challenge. So this time we're going to go back and we're going to look at this fill down. So this is a very common use case. This was built by my colleague Carl, and it's actually an output from Xero, the accounting system. And we have this input, where we've got a project and the expenses and the invoice attached to any project. And we need to ultimately calculate this output where we have just one row for the project, the total invoice amount, the cost, and then the profit. And this is a very common challenge you get when you're trying to prepare some real world data that might have been stored in a spreadsheet. And we're going to make use of this fill down functionality. So let's dive into Tableau Prep and see how we can solve this. Just to go over the requirements, we need to input the data. We need to find a way to separate the project name from the financial transactions in the project field. We need to fill in the field if there are any nulls. We need to remove any project name rows that don't contain any cost or invoiced amounts. And then we need to get the total expense and invoice amounts per project and work out the profit per project. So let's dive into Prep and take a look. So we're going to connect to another file this time. This is going to be an Excel file. And it's going to load in. And this time, I'm going to use my source row number to be able to execute that fill down. So as I mentioned, we can just go there on the menu and include this field. And now when I go to view and clean my data, you'll see that I have that source row number maintained from my data source, which is really nice. So the first thing I need to do is to prepare this data a little bit. So I need to create a new column which has just the high level project name. So I want scatter my plots, I want Dataversity and Data Prep School as their own rows. So I can pull those out where the cost is null and the invoiced amount is null. And so we'll go ahead and create a calculated field. So I'm going to go into my project, create calculated field. I'm just going to call this project 1 for now, because I'm going to get rid of this field later on. So I'm going to say if is null cost and is null invoiced amount, then give me project. I'm just going to end that, because if it's not project, I just want it to be null. I mean, sorry, if these aren't null, I want the value for project to be null. And now we have this structure. And for a long time, until 2023.3, which is 4 years worth of Tableau Prep releases, there has been no easy way to solve this problem. Any of you that have been using Tableau Prep for a while will be familiar with that. With this fill down functionality, it makes it really, really easy. So let's go ahead and set that up. So I'm going to go to my project, go to create calculated field, and we now have this new option for fill down. Let's select fill down. And there's almost nothing to configure there. You know, it's taken my source row number as what to order by. It knows to fill down until it hits the next value. And all I need to do really, you're going to have some slightly more complex cases. All I need to do is go ahead and give this a name. So I'm going to call this project name. And I can't get over how straightforward this is now in the tool. It's been something that people have asked for years and years and years, and we finally have it. And it kind of blows your mind how straightforward it is now that it's in the tool. For a long time, you've had to do all sorts of workarounds to try and solve this problem. And it's been a real pain, to be honest. Whereas now, all you need to do is a couple of clicks, no complex calculation writing, and you've got the fill down. So that's great. Now we need to go ahead and do some cleanup. So I don't need my project 1. I don't need my source row number. And I can also go ahead and get rid of these rows. So I don't need now where project name is this. So I want to filter that out. So let's go ahead and create a filter on here. Filter values with a calculation, and we're going to say project does not equal project name. So we just want to keep the rows where we have our expense 1, 2, 3 and invoice 1. Now we're essentially going to, if we go back to our desired output, we need to get to a place where we've got our invoice amount and our cost in a format that we could pivot these. So we have columns. So we're looking to do a rows to columns pivot. And so I need to clean these up a little bit. I want to ultimately group my expenses and my invoices for any given project. So I'm going to remove the numbers and any spaces from this project field. So I'm ultimately just left with invoice or expense. So let's go ahead. I'm going to add that to another clean step. Let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to clean those values. I'm going to remove the numbers. And I'm also going to just ensure we've not got any remaining spaces. So let's clean and let's trim those spaces just in case. It's good practice to make sure there's no trailing spaces. So we're almost in a place where we can pivot this and get to our final structure, but we need one column that's basically going to become the new rows. And at the moment, our cost and our invoiced amount are separate columns. So we need to bring these together. And it's really straightforward to do that in Tableau Prep. I'm just going to call this merge columns. We can go ahead, select cost and invoiced amount, and just do merge. And those become one column. And now we can go ahead, we can pivot this data. My pivoted field, I'm going to change this from rows to columns. I'm going to go in, I'm going to pivot the project column. Our field to aggregate is going to be our cost. We now get our invoice and our expense, which is great. And we can go ahead now and create that overall cost. So we can call this cost, or what do we want to call it? Profit, sorry. It's going to be invoice minus expense. Save. And now we've gone from that really kind of awkward structure that came out of our accounting system. Let's go back to the source, back here. And we've gone ahead and created a really neat and clean output where we've got an understanding of the profit for each of our projects. And that's all possible with the new fill down functionality. Finally, I just want to call out what you can now do in the output step. So you can now write to Salesforce Data Cloud, which is really nice in terms of tying the Tableau ecosystem together. And you can also include these parameters, system parameters for a timestamp. So you can output the runtime to your file so that you know if a file ran on any given day, exactly what version that was of the file. So you can go ahead and add in those system parameters to your output step now in some of the releases of 2023. So that was our annual recap of Tableau Prep. Thank you for listening. I appreciate that was a slightly longer demo, but I wanted to make sure you had a clear understanding of some of those challenges, and we had a little bit more time after Karen was taken sick. But if you have any questions, I'm happy to take them now. But otherwise, thank you for coming. Thank you for listening. If you need to catch up with the recording at any point, it will be attached to the Bevy page. And feel free to reach out to us on Slack. We're always open to suggestions for this user group. We're always looking for new presenters. I'm sorry about the stratified sampling. I'd encourage you to take a look at Tableau Tim's video because it's a really great resource. It explains it well and you can actually see it working because it wasn't working in this demo. But yeah, if there's any questions, I'm happy to take them. Otherwise, thank you for coming.